The wind had dropped. That is the first thing to hold on to because it matters later and because the 4 men on the ice all recorded it independently in 3 different notebooks and 1 loose sheet of ruled paper that ended up folded into a tobacco tin. The wind had dropped to almost nothing, the drift had settled into a low milk about knee-height, and the light was that particular flat grey of an Antarctic afternoon in late January when the sun is high but the sky has gone the colour of an unlit lamp so that nothing casts a proper shadow and distance stops meaning anything at all. The hut stood behind them, its door swinging on one hinge, 16 years of snow packed against its northern wall like a dune. And 90 yards out, on the open ice between the hut and the sea slope, something was standing. Nobody shouted. Read that again, because it is one of the strangest details in the whole record. 4 men, one of them 22 years old, alone on an ice shelf, and the first response from any of them was that they all stopped walking at roughly the same moment and stood there looking, and then one of them, without turning his head, said the word figure. Just that. A flat noun, as though naming a thing on a chart. It was pale, not white. They were emphatic about that, all 4 in their own separate wordings, because they had spent months among every shade of white the continent manufactures, and they knew that this was not one of them. Pale in the way old bone is pale, or wet paper, or the underside of a fish. It was tall, taller than a man, though how much taller depends on whose account you take, and I will come back to why the estimates cluster the way they do. It had a top that suggested a head without committing to one, a narrowing, a slight rounded rise, and no features that any of them would swear to afterward, though 2 of them wrote independently of an impression, and I use their word, of being regarded. And it had no thickness. This is the part that resists ordinary reading, and I want to slow down here because it is the whole hinge of the story. A man standing at 90 yards is a solid. He occupies volume. Move a few paces sideways, and you see a little more of one shoulder, a little less of the other. The geometry of him rearranges itself as your angle changes, because that is what solid bodies do in the world. The thing on the ice did not do this. The party did not simply stand and stare. They moved. Over what one of them called a considerable interval, several minutes at the least, they walked laterally along the ice, 3 of them fanning out, and the shape stayed exactly as it was. Same width, same edges. No side of it appeared, no side of it hid. It was, as one account puts it, as though a shape had been cut from card and set upright in the snow, and the card turned always to face us, though nothing about it turned. Wrong in the way a paper cutout is wrong, not monstrous, not misshapen, just impossibly, calmly 2-dimensional in a place where everything else, the crevasse lips, the sastrugi, the 4 men's own boots, was aggressively 3, and behind it, on the snow, there was the tail, long, low, perhaps 12 to 15 feet of it, running back from the base of the figure and away to the left, lying against the surface rather than resting on it, and this distinction was made carefully and repeatedly in the accounts by the one man who would not stop making it. It was the same pale as the figure. It was narrow, and it tapered, and it did not move, no coiling, no drag, no sweep. But it was not straight either. It had a shallow curve to it, one gentle bend, as a rope lies when it has been dropped rather than laid. Now here is what they watched it do, and here I am going to give you their words rather than mine, because mine would only soften them. From the loose ruled sheet. At about 10 minutes past the hour, the figure turned upon its axis, as a page turns. It did not step. It narrowed. Within perhaps 2 seconds, it had reduced to a vertical line of no appreciable breadth, and remained so briefly, and then it was not there. From a pocket diary, written the same evening in pencil, it went edge on and thinned out to a wire and then to nothing. I saw no part of it depart. It did not walk off nor sink. The snow where it stood was unmarked. From the notebook of the 4th man, the magnetician, the one this story is really about. The figure achieved edge-on aspect and extinguished. The appendage did not. The appendage remained fully visible upon the snow for a period I estimate at 1 second, possibly slightly more, after the figure had ceased to be present. I record this without explanation. I record it because I saw it and because 2 others have said aloud that they saw it also. 1 second, perhaps a little more. I have spent a long time with that single second, and I want you to sit inside it for a moment, because everything that follows in this story, the recantations, the medical log, the sanatorium at Hobart, the plate withdrawn from the register, everything grows out of it, because a flat thing that turns edge on and disappears has a perfectly ordinary explanation, and I will give it to you honestly before we are finished. But a flat thing whose tail outlives it does not. Consider what that lag actually implies. If the figure were genuinely 2-dimensional, a sheet, a membrane, a cutout, then turning it edge-on would take all of it out of view at once, figure and tail together, because they would lie in the same plane. They did not go together, which means the tail was not in the figure's plane, which means the figure was not a plane at all. It was something with extension in a direction the 4 men could not see into, presenting to them a face that never varied because they were never looking at its body, only at its cross-section, held steady toward them the way a hand held between your eye and a lamp holds still. It was not flat, it presented flat, and when it went, it did not leave. Nothing crossed the snow. Nothing dropped into a crevasse. They searched. It rotated. That is the only verb the geometry permits. Rotated out of the aspect in which it had been standing, and the long, low thing trailing behind it, being further out of that plane, took a heartbeat longer to follow. There is a photograph of it. 1 exposure on a glass plate, taken during the lateral walk at a shutter speed of 1/25 of a second by a man who later swore under medical questioning that he had not remembered pressing the shutter at all. In the print that survives, the figure is there, 90 yards out, pale against grey, its edges too clean. And the tail is there, lying on the snow behind it, in that one shallow bend. Everything else in the frame throws a shadow. The figure does not. Neither does the tail. The sun that morning stood low enough to throw the hut's own shadow 40 feet across the ice, and you can measure it in the print, and you can measure the shadows of the 2 bamboo marker stakes near the hut's northern wall, and the shadow of the sledge runner propped against the door. 4 shadows, all leaning the same direction, all consistent with a sun bearing of roughly north-northeast at that hour and latitude. 90 yards out, the pale shape stands on clean, unmarked snow with nothing behind it and nothing beneath it. No shadow. Not a faint one. Not a short one. None. A flat object in sunlight throws a shadow whether it is a sheet of canvas or a torn map or a sail. A man throws a shadow. Snow throws shadows into its own hollows. The thing in the frame does not interrupt the light at all, and yet the emulsion recorded it as brighter than the ice. I want to slow down here, because the temptation with material like this is to rush toward the ending, and the ending is the least interesting part. What matters is the sequence. The order in which 4 men saw a thing, and the order in which 3 of them stopped having seen it. The man who took the exposure was a magnetician. That was his actual designation on the expedition roll, magnetic observer, 2nd class, and his work was the least glamorous and most tedious on the ice. Declination, dip, horizontal intensity, 3 readings a day, recorded in a stiff-covered field book in pencil because ink froze. He was in his early 30s. He had trained in terrestrial magnetism at a provincial observatory. He had a stammer that worsened in cold, and by every account from the men who wintered with him, he was the sort of person who is trusted precisely because he is not interesting. Nobody described him as imaginative. That detail matters enormously later when a physician needed him to be imaginative. He was not supposed to be at that hut at all. The party had gone out from the main base with a dog team and a light sledge on a supply detour, a depot check, the dullest possible errand, confirming that a cache laid down the previous season had not been drifted over or broken into by skua. The hut was incidental. It stood in the lee of a low rock outcrop. It had been built for a different expedition 16 years earlier, and nobody had wintered in it since. Nobody had even opened it in 4 seasons. Its door was drifted to the latch, its stovepipe had gone over, and inside, when they eventually forced it, they found the ordinary museum of abandonment. Tins with their labels bleached white, a half-burnt candle, a pair of reindeer skin boots, stiff as furniture, and a table with 3 enamel mugs set out on it. The mugs are in every account. They are in the field book. They are also, I should tell you plainly, entirely unremarkable. Men leave mugs out. The thing was already standing there when they came around the outcrop. That is the part every one of the 4 accounts agrees on, and it is the part that unsettles me most. It was not moving toward them. It was not startled. It was in the lee of the hut, on the sheltered side, in the place where drift does not accumulate, the way you or I would stand out of the wind. Waiting is the wrong word, and I am going to use it anyway, because 4 men used it independently, and the field book uses it. It was waiting in the lee. Now, the snow. Wind-crusted snow in that region takes an impression and keeps it. This is not folklore. It is why polar navigation could ever function. The sastrugi hold. A bootprint pressed into wind-hardened crust at low temperature can survive weeks, a fortnight, a month, longer if the wind stays off it, because the crust does not flow and there is almost no melt. The party's own prints from that morning were still legible when they came back past the outcrop 9 days later on the return leg. 9 days. 16 men boots worth of tracks, dog pads, sledge runner lines, all of it still there. Sharp enough that one of them commented in his diary on how strange it was to walk back through your own morning. There was no drag mark. The tail was long and low, and it lay on the snow. You can see it lying on the snow in the print. It bent. It had weight enough to bend. And when they walked the 90 yards, and they did walk it, all 4, within minutes, which is more than most witnesses to anything ever manage, they found unbroken crust. Not smoothed crust, not a swept-looking channel. Unbroken. The little wind-carved ridges ran across the ground where the tail had lain, continuous, undisturbed, the way they ran everywhere else. Something that presses hard enough to curve under its own length does not rest on that surface and leave it perfect, unless it was not resting on that surface. 3 of them wrote about the snow at the time. Within a year, 2 of them had explained it away, and the order in which they did it tells you almost everything about how this kind of thing ends. The first to move was the party leader, the senior man, a sledging veteran with a reputation to protect and a book contract, as it turned out, to protect it with. His retraction came in the form of nothing at all. He simply did not mention it. His published narrative covers those 9 days in 11 pages and does not include the hut, the outcrop, the exposure, or the walk. It is not a denial. It is an absence, and absences are cheaper than lies and last longer. The second was the dog handler, and his was written. 8 months after the fact, he signed a short statement, a paragraph, really, to the effect that on reflection he believed the party had seen a marker flag on a broken bamboo pole, that the light had been poor, and that he had been unwise to have said otherwise. I have read that paragraph a number of times. The phrasing does not sound like him. It sounds like the man who wrote it down for him. And note what it concedes and what it does not. It concedes the figure. It says nothing whatever about the tale. Whoever drafted that retraction was careful to retract only the part that had an ordinary explanation available. The third witness never said anything either way, publicly, for the rest of his life. He died in 1971. In 1968, a doctoral student wrote to him about the expedition's magnetic program and, almost as an afterthought, asked about the hut. He answered every question about magnetism in detail across 3 pages, and on the hut he wrote one line, "I would rather not, and I am sorry," which leaves the 4th. He kept insisting. That is the whole of his offence, and I want to be precise about the form it took because it was not raving. It was worse than raving. It was methodical. He wrote to the expedition's scientific committee twice in a neat hand, asking that the exposure be printed and examined for shadow geometry, the very thing I described to you a moment ago. He asked that the crust at the site be photographed on the return leg. He asked for a second opinion on the plate from a photographic chemist. He kept trying to describe the tail, and he kept failing, and he kept trying again, and it is in those failed descriptions that the medical file begins to take an interest in him, because he could not say what shape it was, without saying that it turned in a direction he could not point to. And a man who says that twice in a doctor's hearing has, in 1929, described his own diagnosis. The medical log is 11 pages, and I have gone through it line by line more than once. And what strikes me hardest is not what it accuses him of, but how gently it does so. Ship's surgeon's entries from late February onward. Sleep disturbed, appetite reduced, preoccupation with a single incident of the sledging journey, patient articulate, oriented, cooperative in all other respects. That last clause is repeated 4 times across those 11 pages. Articulate, oriented, cooperative in all other respects. A man who is functioning perfectly well in every domain of his life except one, and that one domain is a fact he is refusing to abandon. The diagnosis, when it comes, is polar anemia, and I want to be fair to the surgeon here, because polar anemia was a real clinical category in the period, a loose bundle of symptoms attributed to prolonged cold, poor diet, and the absence of sunlight, lethargy, irritability, morbid fixation. It was not a euphemism when it was coined, but it was, by 1929, a very convenient container. It explained anything a man in the ice said that his colleagues did not wish to have said, and notice the direction of the reasoning. He was not diagnosed and then found to be making strange claims. He was found to be making strange claims and then diagnosed, and the claim itself was entered as the presenting symptom. The thing he saw became the evidence that he could not be trusted to have seen it. He was landed at Hobart in the first week of March and admitted to a private sanatorium in the hills above the town, a place that took long-stay patients of the respectable sort, the kind of institution where a family paid quietly and no one asked. The admission record survives. Under the heading of cause, someone has written, "Exhaustion following Antarctic service." Under duration of stay, nothing at all. He was there 4 months. He left in July, and he did not go back to the ice, and he did not go back to magnetic work, and for the remaining decades of his life, he took employment in a field that had nothing to do with instruments or observation or the recording of anything. I will not name the town. His descendants are living and have asked, through an intermediary, that the family not be made into an attraction. I am honouring that. But I will tell you the one detail they gave me permission to pass on, because they consider it important, and I agree with them. He never recanted. Not once, not on paper, not to a doctor, not on his deathbed. He simply stopped speaking about it to people who were not family, and to family, when asked directly, he said the same 11 words for 40 years, and they are the reason I have spent as long as I have inside this material. I know what I saw, and I could not say it properly. Now let me lay out the 3 vacancies, because this is the part of the case that does not depend on any man's word. The first is the hut. Its position is given in the expedition's own chart work, and it is given again in the base records of the party that erected it 16 years earlier, and those 2 figures agree with each other to within the tolerance you would expect from the instruments of the day. Modern survey work does not agree with either of them. The physical remains, and there are remains, timber sills, a stoveplate, The anchor points of the guy wires driven into gravel sit on a bearing that is 11 degrees off the charted line from the fixed landmark used in both original fixes. 11 degrees is not an instrument error. It is not a transcription slip. A slip gives you tens or hundreds, not 11. There are honest explanations. Glacial movement is one, and the ground there is not the stable rock people imagine Antarctica to be. Magnetic declination misapplied is another, and this was a magnetic expedition working in the one region on Earth where a compass is closest to useless. I am not telling you that the hut moved. I am telling you that the coordinate that ought to be the most boring number in this entire story is the one number in it that nobody has ever been able to make agree with itself, and that the men who took the bearing were the men who stood 90 yards from the figure. The second vacancy is the negative. It exists in the photographic register in the proper hand at the proper date, entered with plate number, exposure, and a subject line that reads, "In full, figure and trail, ice from hut." That entry is not crossed out. 6 lines below the last entry of the sledging series, in different ink and a different hand, is an appended note: fogged, destroyed, not damaged, not withdrawn, destroyed. And only that one, in a series of 31 exposures made on the same box of plates, in the same conditions, in the same week, of which the other 30 are catalogued and held and available to anyone who applies. Emulsion fogging is real, and it is common, and in polar work it is almost expected. Emulsion fogging is not selective. It does not walk down a plate box and choose the one image that 4 men were told to stop talking about. The third vacancy is on the print, and it is the only piece of physical evidence in this case that you and I can still look at. The surviving print is a contact print, and the emulsion on it is damaged, and the damage does not behave. Emulsion damage from heat, from damp, from chemical failure, from age, propagates in relation to the physical object. It starts at an edge, it follows a fold, it blooms from a point of contact, it respects the rectangle. This damage respects the figure. It runs along the outline of the standing shape and around the long, low trailing mark behind it, and it stops, and the rest of the frame, the hut wall, the crust, the horizon, the sky, is clean. I have had the opinion of 2 people who work with historical photographic material for a living, and neither would put a name to it, and both used the same word independently, and the word was odd, not impossible. Odd. Somebody may have retouched it, and the retouching may have failed over 90 years. That is a real possibility, and I hold it open. But if somebody retouched it, they retouched precisely the 2 things in the frame that were not supposed to exist, and they did it well enough that the damage now reads as an accident. And here is where I have to stop building and let the case be taken apart, because there is a deflation available, and it is a good one, and I would be a poor guide if I hid it from you. At 90 yards, through moving drift, at low sun, a marker flag on a broken bamboo pole is a pale vertical shape with no thickness. It has no thickness at any angle, because it has no thickness. Turn a flag edge on to the wind, and it becomes a line. Let the wind drop, and it becomes nothing. And a broken bamboo pole does not stand upright. It leans, and it drags its upper length along the crust behind it, long and low, exactly as described, and it leaves no drag mark because a bamboo cane laid on wind crust weighs almost nothing at all. Every physical property of the thing is accounted for, every one. And isolation does the rest, because isolation manufactures monsters, and it manufactures madmen out of the same material, which is a man with too much silence and one image he cannot put down. 4 men on a supply detour past an abandoned hut, keyed up, underfed, 16 years of nobody in that doorway. I find this persuasive. I want to say that clearly, without hedging. Given only the figure, I would close the file. But I am not given only the figure, because a flag on a pole and the pole itself are one object, and one object falls once. When the wind takes it down, the cloth and the cane go together in the same instant into the same drift. That is not what four men wrote down within hours of it happening, and it is not what the one who would not stop insisting spent his career and his good name trying to describe. The figure turned edge on and became a line, and then became nothing, and the tail stayed, a full second, long enough for a man with a plate camera and a magnetician's training in careful observation to count it, and to keep counting it, in a neat hand, to a committee, and to a surgeon, and to no one at all for 40 years. So we come back to it. 90 yards of wind-crusted snow, a hut nobody had wintered in for 16 years, a shape standing in its lee with no thickness to it at any angle, and something long and low lying out behind it across the ice. It turns, it thins, it goes. If the marker fell, what stood there a moment longer than the thing that cast it?